Hello and welcome to the Freight Flow Advisor Brief, your global freight and logistics supply podcast, where we break down current industry news into meaningful analysis. Today, we're talking about one of the most quietly important stories in global freight right now. FedEx is returning about $800 million in tariff refunds to its customers. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a simple good news headline. Money went out in the form of tariffs. Those tariffs were later ruled unlawful, and now the money comes back. But if you work in logistics or finance or even procurement, you know nothing in this space is that simple. The question isn't just about, will I get a refund? The real questions are, who's actually getting paid? How fast does this money move? And what does this really tell us about who really owns this shipment level data? So if you're new to the tariff situation, or you just need a little bit of background, let's start with the basics. In early 2026, courts began unwinding a set of tariffs that had been imposed under a law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or the IEEPA. Now, these were emergency tariffs that hit a wide range of imported goods. Shippers, importers, and even end customers ended up paying those charges on top of normal duties. Now, after those tariffs were struck down, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency built a refund process inside its ACE portal using a tool called CAPE. CAPE is basically the government's way of saying, if you paid these specific tariffs, here's where you can come and claim some of that money back. Now, here's the key detail. Refunds don't go directly to whoever felt the pain on the invoice. Legally, the refunds go first to whoever was listed as the importer of record on customs. Now, in many small parcel and express shipments, that isn't the shipper. It's often the carrier or the customs broker. So FedEx stepped into that role in a big way here. According to its disclosures and coverage in outlets like Yahoo Finance, FedEx expects to return roughly $800 million in IEEPA tariff refunds. Now, this all starts in August, and the company has said very clearly, quote, our intent is straightforward. If refunds are issued to FedEx, we will issue refunds to shippers and consumers who originally bore those charges. Now, to operationalize that, FedEx started receiving refunds from CBP around mid-May. It then plans to launch a customer portal roughly around July 10th, where customers can verify whether there's a refund tied to any of their given shipments. Initial payouts to customers are targeted for about August 10th. So the timeline is legal ruling and refund mechanism. Refund flows to FedEx as importer of record, and FedEx builds a portal that matches entries to customers and pushes that money back out. Now, that's the simple version. But let's talk about why this gets much more complicated once you zoom in. If you're a shipper or a freight operator, the real story here isn't just that FedEx is returning that money. It's that your ability to recover that money depends on your data structure. It's important to think about the path a single tariff charge takes. A shipment moves, a customs entry is filed, a duty and a tariff are paid, and an invoice goes out to a customer. Years later, a court says that specific tariff line was unlawful. We're going to refund it. To actually get a usable refund into your P&L, you need to be able to answer four basic questions. One, which entry numbers had those tariffs? Two, which shipments do those entries correspond to? Three, which customer or business unit ultimately bore that cost? Four, how do you prove that to the carrier, broker, or CBP when they ask? So if your data is clean, that's a traceable path, right? It's entry, shipment, invoice, customer. You can reconcile the refund, close the loop, and book the cash. But if your data is messy, say if importer of record responsibilities have been outsourced without clear visibility, or if your custom entries live in one system and your freight invoices live in another, then a legally owned refund can turn into a queue of exceptions. And we're talking about a ton of manual reconciliation instead of immediate working capital. So this is why a lot of trade advisors are pushing companies to go back to some of the basics. Pull your ACE reports, check who's listed as importer of record on CBP Form 7501. Make sure your banking details are live in ACH for refunds. You need to confirm that either you or your broker or the carrier has a clear plan to file a CAPE. Because here's the blunt truth: if you don't control your importer of record status and your entry data, you may not control your refund. And that's not just a parcel issue. The same logic applies in ocean freight, air cargo, rail, and drayage when brokers and forwarders are filing entries on your behalf. You have to remember that complexity grows with every handoff. So before we go any further into the implications, I want to pause for a moment and talk about a tool that's built specifically for this kind of problem. This episode is brought to you by Freight FA and specifically our Freight Flow Advisor. It's a chat based engine behind freightfa.com. Because if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I get the FedEx story, but I have thousands of shipments across modes and I have no easy way to see my tariff exposure by lane, customer, or broker. Flow Advisor is built for exactly that kind of situation. Now, here's how it's built in for your day to day: it's a chat first analysis. So instead of wrestling with half a dozen spreadsheets, you can talk to Flow Advisor the way that you would talk to a trade analyst. You could say, show me tariff spend by carrier for the last 12 months, or break out duty versus surcharge versus emergency tariff for my top 5 customers. It's designed to translate complex freight data into plain language answers for you, along with clear visuals. Pricing is built for operators. Freight FA is structured so that even mid-sized shippers and forwarders can get enterprise level cost intelligence without enterprise level pricing. You're not just buying a giant ERP, you're subscribing to a freight focused intelligence layer that sits on top of your existing systems. So listen, if you want to turn tariff volatility into informed decision making instead of firefighting, check out freightfa.com and explore Freight Flow Advisor. It's a way to make sure you're not surprised by your own freight data. All right, as we pivot back to our FedEx tariff refund story, we want to talk about why this matters. But first, we need to zoom out. For freight operators, this is a reputational test. FedEx and UPS have publicly said they'll pass refunds back to customers who paid those tariffs. That's a strong commitment. And if they execute that well with clear portals, understandable documentation, reasonable timelines, and minimal friction, it further strengthens their position with enterprise shippers who care deeply about transparency and trust. But if they stumble, it becomes a case study in how not to manage a large scale refund process. The next thing is for shippers and importers, this is really a wake up call on importer of record strategy. A lot of companies, especially smaller ones, have treated IOR as a line item, something that the carrier or broker can handle. We just are focused on our freight moving. And that works fine until something like this happens, where control over the IOR field effectively becomes control over the first step of refund receipt. Going forward, I think more companies are going to ask, in which countries do we want to be our own importer of record? Where does it make sense to delegate and with what visibility requirements? How do we design contracts so that refunds don't get trapped with intermediaries? And for the broader global supply chain, this ties directly into how we think about emerging trade lanes. As sourcing spreads across Southeast Asia, India, Mexico, and other regions, the number of customs interactions and the variety of tariff regimes are going to go up. That makes tariff intelligence, rather than just freight rate intelligence, a core capability. It's not enough to know what you're paying per container or per pallet. You need to understand the regulatory layer sitting on top of those moves, because that layer can be switched on and off with a court ruling. And then suddenly you've got an $800 million event to manage. So, in closing, I want to talk about some things that you should watch for and really how you should translate all this into action. First, as stated before, you should really audit your importer of record footprint. Know in concrete terms where you show up as IOR and where your carriers and brokers own that field. Make that a conscious choice, not a historical accident. To tighten your shipment to entry data trail, work with your internal teams and with tools like Freight Flow Advisor to make sure you can move from a tariff charge to a specific shipment to a specific customer and a specific invoice. That trail is what turns legal refunds into usable cash. Next, treat digital trade infrastructure as a core asset. ACE access, CAPE filing readiness, ACH setup, and freight intelligence are now part of your infrastructure stack. alongside ports, trucks, rails, and warehouses. If you ignore that layer, you're going to feel it every time a policy moves and you end up stuck doing more manual reconciliation. So listen, FedEx's $800 million refund plan is not the last time we'll see this movie. Trade policy is going to continue to shift. Tariffs will come and go, but what will separate the winners from everyone else is not who reads the headlines first. It's truly who can see their own data clearly and act on it. So, listen, that's it for today. Thanks for listening to our episode. If you've enjoyed it, share it with a colleague. Make sure to follow us on social media at The Freight Flow Advisor. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. You can watch these episodes on YouTube or you can listen to them on Apple or Spotify. Lastly, if you head to our Substack, we've curated an article about this topic that has even further, deeper analysis for you to discuss with your logistics teams. Just head over to substack.com and search the Freight FA Brief. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe. Until next time, this has been your Freight Flow Advisor Brief.